Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's freemanjack on TNS Radio. That's tnsradio.ning.com and Scottish Sovereigns on the Land.ning.com. Before I start, just a quick shout out for that tune. I noticed somebody was liking that. Was that Soul Kid? Yeah, good bit of taste there, mate. That was a bit of Spring Jack. What bloody hell was that tune called? Can't remember now. Where's the record sleeve gone? That's Spring Jack with double-edged dub from about 92, I think that one. Alright, seeing as I'm a little earlier in the evening now and it's a weekday, start giving out my old Saturday caution. Tonight's show will be covering adult topics in an adult nature, and potentially there'll be some slipping into some adult language from time to time. So if you've got sensitive ears or your granny's in the room or something, plug her ears with cotton wool and sit back and enjoy. A bit of a jump to this slot. Was only given the heads up on this about 2 a.m. this morning. Thanks, Vin. Always good to have advance warning on these matters. And in that call, Vin was discussing the nature of my shows and the content. And he obviously is very happy with the content of all of my shows, but specifically has been being contacted by people who find my shows about the topic of sort of mental health and sort of emotional well-being to be particularly useful, and he has asked me to slant towards the kind of finding solutions to mental health and emotional problems. Just a quick shout out first of all, a whole bunch of people in the chat room that I don't recognise the names of. We've got Anima there, I haven't seen before. Bill's Galore, I love that name. Who else did we see here? Dear G Doom, not seen them before. I'm Alone. Who else have we got here then? Jake, he was a recent addition the other day, if I'm not mistaken. A few others down there. Who else we got? Ocean Rising, Soul Kid, T3 Mark. Okay, cool. Okay, and just a big shout out as well to the Welfare All Stars team and their new addition Kaza. Just a fabulous show this afternoon. I was sitting this end of the technical wizardry, producing for them. Real good stepping up to the plate there from Nick and the lads there with Welfare not being well today. So, Welfare being unwell. Unwell Fairy. Right, so mental health problems. Anybody that's not tuned into my shows covering the subject, I openly and freely admit to having been a widely medicated sufferer from various forms of personality disorder and mental health issues. Got sucked into a life of drink and drugs with it. Largely self-medicating, I would feel now in retrospect, but at the time it felt a lot like I was having fun, to be quite honest, and it wasn't really until I kind of grew up and realised that fun didn't necessarily consist of dribbling on yourself and sitting in a puddle of your own sick, that I kind of really woke up to what I was doing to myself. And largely, I suppose what I was trying to do was anaesthetise myself against those parts that life had the hands that life had dealt me that I couldn't cope with, as I'm sure that many of you are familiar with doing from time to time, if not on a regular basis. There's certainly a broad spectrum of difficulties that people can suffer from with their mental health, and just with their sense of well-being. You know what I mean? I think that possibly the creation of the mental health industry has created a whole raft of sensations, of experiences, of normal spectrum behaviour that has now become the realm of doctors and medicine. Now, the causes for that possibly are largely societal, and I certainly feel that for anyone growing up sane in as corrupted and lunatic asylum-like a society as we have found ourselves in the early stages of the 21st century, I think that really the display of mental instability is probably actually the greatest indication of underlying sanity than anything else, because if you are coping with what you're given in this modern day and age, the chances are you're either dead from the neck up or you're a complete goddamn loony. So really everybody that's actually, actively seeking assistance or perceives some lack of well-being, lack of emotional well-being, the first thing that I've got to say to you all is that the chances are you are just perfectly sane and are just all too aware of the realities that you and your fellow sort of denizens of this planet inhabit. I am not normally open to callers on my shows. I must admit I find the slightest distraction a real kind of dent to my stream of consciousness. But largely speaking, the shows that I sort of struggle with that are my kind of better frontier science shows, where really I'm doing my very best to understand the subject that I'm talking about in my own head, let alone trying to explain it to somebody else. Whereas this subject I am obviously intimately, personally familiar with, and have, by way of discovering my own kind of escape route, have studied at great length many of what the sort of greater minds on the subject have put out, what has created kind of psychological theory and the ideas driving the kind of medicate or bust mentality that drives the psychiatric profession at the moment. So just if anybody has got an issue that's pressing at the moment, even if they just want somebody to bloody talk to about the miserable experience that they're having at the moment, and would like some sort of clues as to how to find sort of a few rungs on the ladder above where they are at the moment, please, there's a call-in live button at the top of the TNS page there. That's on www.tnsradio.ning.com. If you go to the call-in live tab at the bottom of the at the top of the screen, you'll see Freemanjack there, call-in live. That should take you straight through. I don't think we've ever actually tested this, but that would take you straight through to my Skype account. Try and have TNS turned off in the background if you are going to call in, and I'll do my best to throw a tune straight on and get you sorted out for level before we bring you to air, and possibly get some sort of a grounding into what your subject material is. Essentially, this is kind of one of the formative ideas behind the welfare.org setup, was in fact that we had recently lost a friend to suicide because of essentially long-term mental health problems and the issues surrounding sort of debt and the current economic situation. Having had that happen, having sort of lost somebody that was close to us, and realising that this situation was really now the jackboot at the door, certainly at the back door. They don't come in through the front one. They're not as straightforward as the Nazis. That really we had to do something about this. And while we have taken a remarkable amount of flack from certain departments, certain directions about promulgating information about the benefits system on TNS, we have tried to outline that our intention is not to push anybody onto benefits or to direct anybody to accept benefits if they have any possible means of supporting themselves, but simply this, that if you're in a situation, if society has banged on your door enough times, if the bailiffs have come, if the court warrants drop through the letterbox on a daily basis, it soon becomes a situation where you kind of turn turtle, where you tuck in your head and cover your ears, and the very best that you can manage is a no, please go away, leave me alone. And really, part of this is down to a lack of the wherewithal with which to take on their bureaucracy, and that's really where the welfare.org.uk team come in, that we may not be able to save you from your financial crisis, we may not be able to keep the wolf from the door, we'll certainly do our bloody best, but when it comes to resisting the tumult of bureaucracy and of gaining leeway that adjusts for your personal circumstances, which is largely precluded from the welfare state now, that we can and have gained breathing space for people in really tight situations. And in addition to that, we've got the wonderful Wild Swan with her economy living recipes and budget shopping techniques and wild food foraging and herbal animal treatments, who's making the wonderful counterpoint to all of the kind of doom and gloom about the destruction of our welfare state that goes on in some of the other parts of the show. But equally, kind of me as a kind of backroom pilot, I tend to pick up a lot of those people who come to us initially through benefits issues, but through the discussion of their benefits issues, it arises that they have mental or emotional difficulties that they're having difficulty overcoming, and that's where I step in the background on Skype privately and do my very best to just support people. I mean, a lot of the time you don't really need anybody telling you what to do. We all kind of know what's best. Whether we do what we know is what's best or not is another issue, but largely speaking, we don't need people telling us what to do. We know what we should be doing. What we actually need is facilitation. We need people to help us achieve us doing what we know is already required of us in order to be able to overcome whatever current crisis we feel that we're in. I'll try and sort of go through some practical steps as to how to get around that kind of sense that the jackboot's imminent at the door, because generally speaking, largely it actually isn't. It's the threat of the jackboot at the door that they use to kind of manipulate your fear of them taking all of your possessions and scaring your family. The fabulous Elvis Costello and the Attractions there. Elvis is the real peak of his vocal talents, I feel, and Steve Naive, that was one of their kind of reunions after the initial Elvis and the Attractions break-up from an album called Blood and Chocolate. There's a place where time stands still and you keep taking those little pink pills. And that's essentially it's a description of a middle-class man caught in a one-bedroom flat on medication for his nerves, career gone down the tubes, probably broke up his marriage, surrounded by noises that he can't control in an environment that it's none of his choosing, and the very situation, the very circumstance that he finds himself in is the circumstance that will keep him within that circumstance. And that really is key to all of this, is that the mental health issues, the emotional health issues leave us in a state of stasis. They leave us in a state of frozen motion, where we find ourselves repeating the same ritualistic sets of behaviour, that usually the discomfort the sensation of, of depression or of anxiety is usually such that one will do just about anything to avoid it, and that in this avoidance we both kind of emotionally seek avoidance, and we also often chemically seek avoidance, or comfort eating, or drowning your sorrows with a bottle of wine, and that very soon you may see a pattern, a sequence beginning to appear, where an overwhelming bill lands on the doorstep, and where once you might have kind of tightened your belt a bit, reined in a few other bits of the budget, and coped with the excessively large bill. Whereas once one finds yourself in a depressive or an anxious state, the temptation is so prescient. The temptation is just so tempting to simply avoid the issue, to make it go away for that day, however one might seek to make that go away. Like I say, whether it be binging on food that one can't afford, or taking to drink or drugs to anaesthetise oneself. But essentially, what you can do to find your way out of these places is to pick baby steps. That often the state that we find ourselves in is simply because we have a sense of being overwhelmed by our circumstances. The bills are overflowing. The bailiff's letters are becoming more and more threatening. You got a nuisance neighbour that is making your life a living hell. The situation that you're in can seem much like a prison, and often even a prison of your own making. If you're suffering from various types of compulsive disorder, it's very easy to become captive within your own home. The anxieties of the outside world become so complex that you can't cater for them, and so you avoid them. And again, this avoidance becomes impatterned. It becomes regular. So you begin to see a pattern emerging where, like I say, an overwhelming bill will land on the doorstep. You'll drink a little more than you should, or you'll go out on a spending spree at the shops to make yourself feel better or whatever. And rather than taking any adequate steps towards coping with towards not coping, but towards dealing with the actual problem, we create all sorts of other problems for ourselves in the avoidance of the issue. And I wouldn't for one moment suggest that if you're in one of these states that you should just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do what it is that you're supposed to do, because that really can seem impossible. It really can just seem just too tough. I can't do that. And that really is something, certainly in depressive states, I can't, I feel like I want to die is a sensation that's usually described by people suffering from depressive orders. Anxiolytics, people who suffer from panic attacks and anxiety states, will often feel almost directly threatened in a completely unthreatening situation. So their body will start to respond as if somebody's holding a knife to their throat. They'll perspire, they'll start to feel dizzy, they might get flushed, they might get very cold. Their temper will become very short and hard to control. And these are all natural fight or flight responses, but they're being triggered from some subconscious firmament, some unaccepted, some unabsorbed emotional burden of the past that has gone, under the current, has become subconscious. Often the behaviour that we respond to a situation with, if we respond to similar situations with similar behaviour, then sometimes just simply the re-enacting the physical states that accompany that behaviour will stimulate an identical emotional response without the original stimuli. So it's possible to find yourself in situations, I mean, if you've been a victim of crime, of violence or abuse of some sort, it'd be very easy to find yourself in a completely unthreatening situation and find your body going through the motions of somebody who is under imminent physical danger. So, you know what I mean, to suggest that one should just simply acknowledge and embrace the need to deal with the unavoidable issues that life throws up at you may just simply be too much for some people, that they're beyond that point where they can deal with those sort of issues. And when you find yourself in that place, I mean, this I having never attempted suicide, and I can only guess at where people's head states must be. But one must assume that one gets to a point where where you would think that there was no other option, that to die early was your only option, the only way out of your situation. And what I'm here to say tonight is that isn't the case. There is always an option. There is always, I mean, essentially, there is always choice, and with choice comes more choice. So if you're in your darkest hour, if you're at that point where you're considering suicide, you have to think that there are two choices there. There is the choice to live or die. And you don't have to die, you know what I mean? You're not forced to take your own life. It's not a car crash situation where it's out of your hands. This is something that you're choosing to do. So straight away you understand that you have a choice. If you can see that there is a choice, then suddenly there becomes more choice. Well, if I live, then I can carry on being depressed, or I can seek remedy for the crushing state that I find myself in. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, there's nothing really worse than dying. So, you know what I mean, there may be several things that feel worse than dying, but nothing quite as permanent. So keeping your options open is always, you know what I mean, you have to realise that there is always choice. And to some degree, we actually choose the emotional state that we have at the time. I mean, we all do it without even realising that we do it. You know what I mean? We can go from, I don't know, arguing with the missus until, you know what I mean, somebody says something the wrong way round, and it strikes you as hysterically funny, and you go from, you know what I mean, screaming the rafters down in an argument to in hysterical fits of laughter. You know what I mean? Moods change in the blink of an eye, and almost at choice. You know what I mean? There is a degree of free will in this. I've realised that some of the kind of absence of a full complement of the neurotransmitters that often accompanies depressive states, I wouldn't necessarily like to say that they cause them, but there is a kind of measurable drop-off in serotonin in the blood. That's actually what it's meant by clinical depression, is a clinical morbidity of serotonin, an absence of serotonin. This is what the SSRI branch of antidepressants is supposed to treat, is the shortfall in the amount of the neurotransmitter serotonin. Now, I suppose, as far as confronting the actual things that it is that are probably driving a poor emotional state, there are definitely workarounds for almost everything. I mean, when we're low, like I say, we get into this kind of coward in the corner. Just leave me alone. You know, I mean, don't care what you do, just go away and leave me alone. I no longer care, sort of thing. And in that state, we can have the mechanisms of state and the mechanisms of corporations ride very roughshod over us, and certainly take what was perhaps already a fairly poor situation and only make it worse. In these situations, personal debt, I'm no expert on all of your official offer and your, your accepted for value and all of the Freeman approaches. I personally use the term shunning for my personal discipline. And what I have learnt is that a large proportion of the threatening letters that one receives when you get into debt, into unmanageable debt, that the largest proportion of them are actually just that. They are only threatening. Essentially, it would cost more to pursue the debt than the debt is worth, and so it's very much worth their while basically taking a punt on whether or not they can get you to pay up by increasingly bold and increasingly threatening letters. Had a fabulous one just before Christmas from a particular bailiff, basically threatening to take all the children's presents just before Christmas. Please reply to this letter or we will be visiting your address before December the 25th. Of course, but he didn't, ignored it as usual, posted it all over the internet just to raise the profile of that particular bailiff as well. And this is my point, that many of the mechanisms that the outside world bombards us with are not necessarily fraudulent, I think it's corrupt, but their application is done in such a way that we feel obliged to respond. And in fact, what I have learnt, and as a way of managing my mental health, I have learnt simply just to not open letters from time to time. I know of no law that requires me to open a letter that has come through my letterbox. So I just simply put them in a pile, and if I'm not in a in a appropriate mental state to deal with them, or if I know that, there's no money in the bank for me to be able to deal with them, even if I should choose to do so, then why worry myself with the amounts? Why add to the burden of that day? I quite enjoy the kind of shredding of the bailiff's letters. They've kind of stopped coming now, so I don't have that enjoyment anymore. But it was very cathartic that, once they've written to you 16, 20 times threatening to come and knock on your door, and there's still been no knock at the door, and you're in 24/7, so you know that they would have been if they were coming, then it kind of becomes a little bit comical. And having changed something from being a threat, something being a cause of, kind of poor well-being, it becomes a source of amusement, a source of entertainment. Puppy coming, Jake going through, and puppy being very noisy. It's an extremely waggy puppy. Yeah, so that's my tactic number one, is don't let the bastards grind you down. That usually anything that's come through your letterbox can be dealt with at a later date. If it's important, they'll write to you again usually. I'm sure that there are, court summonses and things like that aren't going to be sent out a second time, but sort of bailiff's letters and water board and all this sort of thing, they will definitely write to you again, so even if you don't even keep the letter, even if you just take it and shred it, if it's good for your mental health and it's likely to get you into it's a bit like, in my mind, people's mental health is essentially the prerequisite tool that they can climb out of a poor situation. So if you're in a position of receiving bailiff's letters, essentially those bailiffs are removing the very tools with which you would be able to pay them, should you choose to do so. So really it's important that you moderate their ability to disable you, and that regardless of their clamouring claims for cash, at the end of the day, your claim for the right of good health and of well-being trumps any claim for bloody fiat currency. We all know it's fucking invented, and we might still bloody need it at the time being, but illusory. So why, why lose your head over, quite literally, over bloody illusory debt that doesn't really exist and can't actually come and hurt you? There's another thing in there as well. I'm sure that Vin would be a better person to talk about this than me, but the difference between a possession warrant and an entrance warrant, even if you're getting court warrants sent to you, there's a very big definition in the UK between a possession warrant and an entrance warrant. Entrance warrants can only be granted for a very slim number of circumstances. So even if a bailiff turns up with a possession warrant, that does not mean that they can come into your house. It doesn't really mean that bailiffs can come into your house anyway, but the police will back up an entrance warrant with a sledgehammer. Whereas if they've only got a possession warrant, provided that door doesn't get opened and they've got no means of entering your premises, then essentially you are safe. And to this degree, if anybody finds that they're facing this sort of a situation, that are very small, very small moves to additionally secure your premises, so putting up fences, putting an extra chain latch on your front door for when you don't know if somebody's coming. Like I say, just little matters just to make yourself feel more comfortable and make yourself feel more confident in your ability to cope with the issues when it's when it arises. So I've got whole heaps of this is like bloody Piccadilly Circus on a Saturday night. My eldest boy is off to darkest Peru tomorrow. I've got to drop him up at Heathrow, and he's going off for a couple of months as a researcher out in the darkest Amazonas, filled with piranhas. And the place that he's got to get to has a road, but the road goes from the Amazon to the Amazon and doesn't actually come out of the Amazon. So he's having to fly in on some little kind of like island hop, a little Cessna at some point in about 20 hours after setting off from Heathrow. And he's busy gathering his belongings about him to go and brave the jungle. Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen. It's Freemanjack. The Piccadilly Circus in my hall has finally calmed down to a gentle hush, and we have Shaziz online with us. Evening, Shaziz.
How you doing?
What, are we mourning where you are?
Let's see. Yes, no, it's in the evening, 4:03 p.m.
Oh, night owling then, are you?
Yeah.
Are you
just getting started.
Are you a fellow insomniac? Are you?
Yeah.
Do you find that you just don't sleep at all, or do you kind of do the nocturnal thing and sort of sleep during the daytime?
Oh, I kind of get up and down all the time. I got to the point where I sleep on the couch a lot because I don't want to.
Okay, do you have the same as me, like a rolling sleep pattern where you couldn't really predict from one day to the next? Have you ever been in a kind of 9 to 5 working environment where that's kind of impacted on your day-to-day living?
Yeah, I usually worked a split shift, but after a while, you get a little exhausted. I usually find that I go maybe days without a whole lot of sleep, and then I'll get to the point where my body just crashes and I'll sleep for a while.
Okay, that sounds like a very similar experience to my own. I know that I, as a young man, certainly worked the same job almost without holiday for about 8 years, and I would routinely have to do that on kind of 2 and 3 hours sleep a night, and be working, even through the weekend. So it wasn't even like I was sleeping in on a weekend to catch up. This would be like a persistent state of, and you just end up in a complete zone, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Kind of in an exhausted haze.
Yeah, it'll definitely take its toll on you. I've got a mind that never shuts down. It even when I'm asleep, it's continuously working. And,
well, funnily enough, I was actually going to raise that as an issue. I wondered if you might have considered yourself to have a degree of kind of like hyperactivity. Certainly, I've got one of my boys has been diagnosed as extreme spectrum attention deficit disorder, which again I don't really agree with the DSM but convenient for getting him extra help at school. And one of his specialists, one of his kinder specialists, actually suggested that I get myself tested because he was fairly convinced that I was the genetic line through which his hyperactivity had descended. I wonder if you'd considered any of those kind of features of yourself.
No, I think that I think a lot of those diagnoses are misdiagnoses because
I entirely agree, but they do give very convenient kind of handles on which to, you know what I mean. It's a linguistic shorthand, shall we say? So perhaps we may not necessarily agree. Let's say that we don't agree necessarily with the treatment of these conditions and necessarily the classic. You know what I mean, the tick box classification of these, but as far as a shorthand goes, there are certainly the likes of you and I and my son who show a degree of mental acuity, mental activity that is above and beyond the kind of peer group that we've probably grown up within.
Yeah, and my wife, she has a little bit of a, you was talking earlier about the serotonin, and she has a little bit of chemical imbalance on that, so she has little problems here and there, but, they got her on certain types of medication that's supposed to balance that kind of stuff out, so I know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, I mean, therein is a word of caution. I mentioned the SSRIs earlier, the specific serotonin reuptake inhibitors, to give them their full name. And these little fuckers, sorry, excuse my French, these are supposed to work by blocking the valve that reabsorbs serotonin from the synaptic head. And this is where the transmitter part of serotonin comes in. It's released by the synaptic head and transmits chemically the electrical nerve impulse across the synapse to the receiver. And in the absence of an adequate supply of serotonin, your nerve signals will become quietened. Essentially, it's like turning the volume down on an amplifier. And these SSRIs are supposed to block the valve that reabsorbs that serotonin, thereby making a kind of persistent excess of serotonin at the synaptic head. And that then when the nerve signal comes along and makes a small serotonin impulse, that serotonin small impulse is then amplified by this kind of excess environment of serotonin. Now, in my experience, this is not the actual outcome. The actual outcome is that your entire nerve path becomes like an amplifier with a hum on the signal. So essentially your nerves are constantly registering a low-level signal. You still perceive the nerve impulses, but there's like a background noise. And my experience of the SSRIs is that, yes, they may clinically redress the imbalance of serotonin levels, but what I found was that the only way that they really address the underlying kind of emotional drive that caused those imbalances in the first place is to make it impossible for you to dwell on those thoughts comfortably. So if you have unpleasant experiences in your life, that the presence of these SSRIs will make the descending into thinking about that low time, you know what I mean, that trauma, whatever, so goddamn unpleasant. They will amplify it to such a degree and make the sensation so much more unpleasant than it ever had been without the antidepressants, that essentially you're trained Pavlovian style out of any critical thinking. Which, in some circumstances, some of the people that I deal with, I mean, I've got a very good friend that I'm working with who is, just hideously traumatised throughout his childhood and, formative years. And he dearly loves his medication, and I would not, in any measure, take that from him in any sense. That I entirely uphold his appropriate treatment with this incredibly powerful psychiatric medicine. But for him, he says it stops him from killing policemen. And seeing as he's a placid bloke, the reason, for him to walk around in society and to be a tame member of society, let's say, with the level of trauma that he's survived, without his medication is just too much for him to cope with. So I'm not for one moment suggesting that all medication is bad, but specifically with the SSRIs, I believe that they lead to suicidalisation, which I think is a subject that we're going to get onto, and it's something that's really ill understood by the doctors because they've never tried this damn stuff. Until you've had it, until you've had the presence of a thought become like a bloody alarm bell in your head that you can't find the off switch for. Yeah, so the very most, what would have been a passing casual thought that may have persisted for tenths of a second in the absence of these drugs becomes a constant signal. And as such, if you do descend into, a depressive mood, the chances of suicidalisation are vastly increased, and the chances of you stepping beyond that where you would normally find yourself going to. Puppy, don't stand outside the door and cry. For God's sake, sorry. The whinging puppy at the door. I know you were saying before we came on air that you've had an awful lot of close friends or family members that have suicided. Do you know if they were using any psychiatric medications at the time?
Yeah, they all were. I've spent the majority of my life kind of in secret being seriously depressed, but because I told you my brain never shuts off. I mean, 24 hours a day, even when I'm sleeping, I'm designing equipment, all kinds of stuff, and I'm constantly thinking about what's going on in the world and trying to make things better for people. And but I never told that to essentially anybody as far as that goes. You're the first one. Cat's out of the bag, but
do you remember Smokey Robinson's "Tears of a Clown"?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember feeling those lyrics as a child.
It's funny that you say that because that's how I coped with all the things that were crazy in the world. Was I used humor to basically laugh in the face of adversity, kind of thing, and it's worked for me all these years, but. Like I say, my brain never shut off, and I always seen the world in a better that it could be a lot better than what it is. You understand what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I mean, again, here's a God, I've now got a waggy puppy coming in the room. This is one of the ways in which these mental health descriptors can be useful as well, in as much as if you can. If you can use the descriptors merely as a kind of a divining tool in order to separate the complexity of kind of emotional and mental disorders, then the ability to compartmentalise them means that you can apply statistical analysis to them. And as a result, I mean, we've already essentially identified that both you and I are of a hyperactive nature. If you identify that with the people who suffer from identified hyperactive disorders, then you start to get a statistical relationship between the things that you're experiencing with your life and may think are coming from you and the statistical likelihood, if you have this particular disorder, for that to be a consequence. And certainly things like drink and drug abuse with hyperactivity run at about 25%. So if you suffer from any degree of hyperactive disorder, like you're describing, then the chances are that at some point in your life you're going to have encountered problems with self-medicating with drink and drugs. You'll also have a 45% likelihood of having sleep disturbance. You'll have a 23% likelihood of suffering serious hospitalisable mental health disturbance.
Yeah. The reason why I brought my own personal story into that deal was to basically put a point across that not everybody can deal with things the same way. And see, one of my cousins that committed suicide, I never knew he was depressed,
No.
I knew that he was laid back and everything like that, and I knew that he was on certain types of medication from younger years, but I never seen the outward signs of it, And the last time that I saw him, I had an opportunity to spend time with him, and then I was at that particular point in time, I was with my family, and I chose my family over going with him to spend time because, you know, you got to have quality time with your family. And so I kind of took for granted that I would always have him around. And so I have these regrets that, you know, that night I always think to myself I could have said or done something, you know, that would have changed the situation by just spending some time with him.
I think everybody who loses anybody close to them always will find some minor detail that they could have done that may have changed the course of events. That's just one of those feelings. But I mean, Jack, you were saying that you weren't aware of him being depressed. Okay, would it be let's put it in theoretical terms, okay? If you are somebody who suffers from some life hiccup, you know what I mean, a marital breakup, you know what I mean, the theft of a car for some people can be quite bloody traumatic. Yeah, you're a bit down in the dumps, you can't quite shake it off, you're struggling to get into work, your boss is nagging you because you keep having so many days off sick, you have to go and see the doctor to get a sick note. You get the sick note, but along with the sick note, you get the doctor urging you that perhaps you ought to consider taking some antidepressants for a short while.
The problem I've seen with the antidepressants, especially Prozac or Ritalin, is that they seem to have some sort of addictive quality to them that if you are suddenly taken off them, you have to be weaned off of them. Otherwise, they, you know, cause a lot of, you know, erratic behavior that you normally probably wouldn't see in an individual.
Well, I think you'll find that actually goes with all of the psychiatric medications, that all of the psychiatric medications, once you reach what they call a clinical dose, that sudden withdrawal from that clinical dose will essentially cause a immediate rebound effect, where whatever you had been suffering from to have sought out the medication will be amplified and returned in droves. So anybody that is considering, you know what I mean, they're continuing on a psychiatric medication, please be very, very careful, very gentle with yourself is the thing to do, to make sure that you pick your time and be very gentle with yourself and allow yourself perhaps a little space to fall apart, perhaps a little space to cry a bit, you know what I mean, tear your hair out if you need to, and just be gentle with yourself and not take yourself too damn seriously until you're at least 3 months off of the damn things, because in my experience they tend to have an incredibly long-lasting subliminal effect almost.
You know, on that subject, what I was talking about, wishing that I could have done or said something that would have avoided that deal, you know, there's probably nothing I could have done, but
this is my point, okay, is that if this young chap that you lost really wasn't suffering from a clinical depression but simply had a life issue that he'd gone to seek help with the doctors from, and if he'd been put onto one of these SSRI type medications, then the chances are the actual suicide wasn't caused by the depression. The suicide would have been caused by this misunderstanding, this failure to understand the effect that these SSRIs have on our thinking. And that's really what I'm trying to impress on everybody, is that if you do get put onto these medications, please, and if you know anybody that's on these medications, please don't go by their current mood or by their average mood. And possibly if they're not aware of this information, then please do your very best to inform them of it or point them in the direction of this pod, because I have experienced this myself. I have been in severe clinical depressive states, and with the addition of SSRIs, I have found myself for the first time in my life in anything that I would describe as a suicidal state of mind. And I really didn't know where it was coming from either. Like I say, a fleeting thought may cross your mind, one that would normally be passed over in an instant, and it becomes like a long-playing bloody record, or like I say, more like an alarm or a siren that you just can't remove from your head. And if this becomes like a repeated state of affairs, that is enough to drive a sane person insane for the sake of a few happy pills off of the doctor, because they can't handle feeling a bit blue, or because their work environment won't permit them to take the prerequisite stress break from it.
it was found later that both of both of my cousins that ended up committing suicide were off their medicines at the time that they did commit suicide.
Okay, well, again, this is another issue. If it was within that 3-month period, again, suicidalisation skyrockets. During the 3-month period of abstinence after coming off of a psychiatric medicine, suicidalisation and suicidal-like thoughts will increase to a ridiculous level. And it really is something. That's what I'm saying about. You really need to be very gentle with yourself. Don't take yourself seriously. Don't take your emotional state seriously. Consistently reassure yourself that this is a drug effect. That this is not how you are. That this is not how you would normally be. Know yourself. Yeah. Know that it's not you. Know that it's the bloody drug. And that's really all I can say about that. It's not something that you can impress on anybody that hasn't experienced it for themselves. But I would suggest that anybody listening who has taken SSRIs or is currently on SSRIs or any of those major brands of neurotransmitter adjusting medications, that they will have experienced this same unbidden, uncontrollable tumult of overly emotionally loaded thoughts that normally wouldn't accompany their kind of everyday to-day thinking patterns.
When somebody's in that position to where they're actually feeling suicidal and all that kind of stuff, it makes the world look like, all hope is lost. And to an outsider, it may look like, it's this will pass. It's not that big of a deal. But when those folks are under the influence of these particular types of medication, like you were saying earlier, things just seem to be amplified.
Well, this is the thing. Just ordinary clinical depression it feels like you're dying. In some of my worst clinically depressed states, I literally was convinced that my body must be dying. It wasn't possible to hurt that much and not be dying. I knew that I was being stupid. I knew that it was, that it was just the physical, the physical manifestation of the psychological state. But even so, it was very hard not to convince myself that I didn't have something seriously physically wrong with me, because even physically it hurt. My hair hurt, my teeth hurt, my nails hurt. It was impossible to open the curtains, impossible to come out from under the duvet, couldn't stand any sound.
From somebody who's experienced that, do you got any advice to somebody who may have that coming down the line to them? Like, even somebody from the outside, like me as a person who, has been through the depression.
Right. Well, my primary tool that I have utilised during my kind of worst states of depression have been the slow walk, doing a lot of looking up. When we're depressed, what I've discovered is that there's a huge correlation between body posture and emotional state. And what we tend to do when we're depressed is we tend to huddle, we tend to hunch, we tend to sit with a very sort of curved spine. And that if you actually pull yourself into that shape, if you sit and hunch, you will feel your mood immediately drop. If you then sit up, bolt upright and nice and straight and pull your shoulders back and puff your chest out, you will immediately feel your mood change to respond to that physical mood. Even Nick, funnily enough, my colleague on with the Welfare All-Stars, came up with the one the other day. He claims that smiling in the mirror, forcing yourself to smile at yourself in the mirror, because of the correlation between the muscle movements of smiling, the muscle position of smiling, and the associated neurotransmitters. He says it's irresistible not to feel better. Having done it, and then having made that small step towards feeling better, the rest kind of flows from there. And for me, the intensive version of that, like I say, is the slow walk looking up. That don't go anywhere. You're not going anywhere, you're just walking for the pleasure of walking. You're walking slowly because you've got nowhere particular to go, and in walking slowly you absorb what's around you. Now I don't know if in America you would have any concept as to what South East London is like, but I should imagine that certain parts of Detroit or Chicago are probably getting there. We have large incidents of gun crime, which is fairly absent in the rest of the country. You know, being crack dealers on every corner, street boys running drugs around on BMXs, police sirens 24/7. This was kind of one of the main places for the London riots of summer last year. And even walking around somewhere like here, there's a tree over, I don't know if you get many of them in America, called buddleia, and these are like triffids. They'll stick out of a bunch of bricks, you know, and you wonder where they're possibly getting the nutrients to grow into these huge plants, but they tend to grow up on the tops of buildings, and they have these enormous trumpets of purple flowers that all the butterflies cluster around. If you walk around and you lift your head, you'll notice things like this. You also tend to find that on street level, you get the kind of corporate face of the town, whereas if you look up above the level of the shops, you'll see all of the underlying architecture, and certainly around here, because London's got a lot of history, you might be looking up at a 200 or 300-year-old skyline. You know what I mean? If you're looking down on the streets, you're looking at fucking Starbucks and Woolworths, you know what I mean? But look up above it, and there's this fantastic sculptural skyline. And again, it's not just the kind of esoteric appeal of this landscape that you find yourself in if you look up from the pavement, but the fact that your head is tilted back on your shoulders forces your posture, it forces your shoulders back, otherwise you strangle yourself. So you have to stand up straight, especially if you're doing this while you're walking. You have to stand up straight, you have to have your head square on your shoulders, because otherwise your eyeballs will ache in your sockets and you won't be able to see high enough, sort of thing. This physical bio loop, this physical biofeedback loop, is probably one of the most powerful tools, much more powerful than any psychiatric drug, to compoundly change the emotional state that you find yourself in. Obviously, it's not going to make the bills go away. It's not going to make the wolf go from your door. But if this is just a kind of a cyclic depression that you find yourself in and can feel it coming on, then certainly before you find yourself under the covers, unable to open the curtains or speak to anybody, then beginning to take physical, and this is the thing, that the locomotion part of that, the walking part of that, induces a Tai Chi, and again the slow walking induces a Tai Chi like flowing action to all of your musculature. And again, this has got an incredible kind of biofeedback loop of wellness that accompanies that kind of physical activity. So that would certainly be the easiest route out of a poor emotional state that I have come across. But I wouldn't mind actually going into sort of what I learnt through my cognitive behavioural therapy sessions that I went through under the National Health, which were an incredibly powerful tool, far more powerful than I ever would have imagined before I went for them, and are now really the National Health Service's psychiatric tool of choice, because essentially they're cheap and it works. And in the current kind of budget of cuts, you're tending to find that CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, is being offered as a first-line treatment rather than pills. So this is... Yeah, go on. Sorry, Chef.
I believe that people from the outside could literally help one another out by spreading positive energy. You know, I always talk about how if you go into a room and you got a frown on your face, you know, you notice that everybody else starts to kind of blend with you, you know. But if you go into a room and you got a smile on your face, you know, big old Cheshire cat eat grin, so to speak, and people don't even know what you're smiling about, but they can't seem to stop themselves from smiling as well. And so, you know, by you walking into the room, you can make a large difference on the energy in that room to make people feel better or worse. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I'd actually suggest that what you've identified there is what Wilhelm Reich identified as orgone energy, which I'm sure that you're familiar with, but for our listeners, this is essentially what the Asian mystics describe as chi, what the likes of Rupert Sheldrake would probably define as an amorphogenetic field. It's the biological force, the energy that drives the biological force, whether that be electromagnetic in nature, which is probably unlikely, or some immeasurable energetic force, but it certainly appears to have a polaric flow, a positive and a negative. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's good orgone and bad orgone, but there appears to be a directional compass about this. And one of the things that Reich broke this down into was neurotic and orgastic. And he realised that when we're in a depressive state, we're in a contractive state, we're in a very introverted state, we focus on our innermost sensations, and that basically turns the compass arrow to point to us. And so we become a net collector of orgone or chi, and that this is actually quite a bad thing for us as natural beings. We're natural exporters of energy. Yeah, we naturally interact on a positive level. We're always, generally speaking, in conversation, people are trying to encourage each other, don't you find?
Yeah.
That politeness. That politeness is
like
actually
the power of positive thinking.
Yeah. Well, essentially, that if we turn that compass arrow around and direct it away from ourselves, that if we, rather than concentrating on our ills, if we look around us to our fellow man and find somebody that appears to be slightly worse off than ourselves, or even in the same place as ourselves, and offer them help, that this is actually a direct means of accessing this kind of like polaric flow. And that if we find ourselves in a, what Reich would describe as a neurotic state, that intentionally entering an orgastic state, i.e. intentionally going out of our way to help some fellow human, that we would reverse that organic flow from, flowing towards ourselves, from collecting it to distributing it, and that in my experience that instantly changes one's mindset. And that I've actually utilised that in dealing with my own depressions. That having had a recent, probably about a year ago now, I had a big dip, a real kind of low moment, and I put it out on, I don't know, Fucksbook or whatever it was. You know what I mean? Whatever social media network. I just chucked my phone number out there and just said, look, you know what I mean? I'm having a really crap time, but I know that this is temporary. I know that in a couple of days I'm going to be fine. And I know that I haven't always felt like that. Anybody needing to get in touch, here's my number. And threw it out there. And immediately felt better for it. And funnily enough, over the following weeks, a few people took me up. They didn't actually call me, but sort of got in touch with me over Facebook. And I was able to help other people who were in equally dark places. And, like I say, completely reverse that direction of energetic flow from towards myself to away from myself. And this friend of mine who's comfortable on his medications because of his inability to deal with his trauma as a child, he intentionally uses that mechanism to overcome his insurmountable emotional and psychological problems, that he actually can't even hold a conversation with somebody unless it's him giving to you. If you turn round in a conversation and try and, pour some attention back on him, he can't stand that reversal. He will actually leave the room. I mean, he'll go back to up north. He'll drive 300 miles back home if you do it to any great degree. You know what I mean? He really, really can't bear it. But if he's in a position of being kind to other people and saying how wonderful they are and, can I help you and what can I do for you, then he can cope. He can manage.
You hit a key point. I spent the most of my life feeling like I never, I felt like I didn't belong here, like I belonged somewhere else on a different planet or whatever. But whenever I was in the situation where I was able to help somebody, when I felt that I was needed, then that was the time where I felt the best. I always felt like if, as long as there was a purpose for me, then I was fine. But whenever, suddenly there was no purpose, I wasn't needed for something, then that was my lows. Does that ring a bell to you?
Absolutely. And this is kind of, this exactly describes this kind of energetic flow. And so certainly this, it's difficult to imagine how one would do this from a position of depression, but this is kind of like a life practice that if you live this rather than think, put it in your toolbox for later. If you generally live yourself a life that is orgastic, that is expressive, that is authentic, then these issues will leave you alone. You will suffer less depression. You won't need the constant gratification of helping other people, because your life will be purposeful.
Yeah, and as long as a person feels like they have a purpose, and for me at least, it's a lot more comfortable when I know that I can help somebody out.
Partly for the likes of ourselves, I would suggest that there's always a bell curve of I wouldn't say intellectual ability. I would suggest more of intellectual acuity, because intellectual ability can often be tempered by education or whatever. But I think that outside of the realms of education, there's a level of mental acuity and that kind of natural, innate mental ability, and that there will always be a bell curve graph of where people's intellect falls on that scale of mental acuity, and that there will always be a very small number on the kind of prow, on the leading edge of that bell curve, and that's basically the place that is inhabited by the denizens of mental institutes, the people who can't cope with now. And the reason why they can't cope with now is because they have the intellectual physique of the next 100 years. They've literally been born 100 years out of the bell curve. Yeah,
I've always been under the belief that there's a lot of people in mental institutions that don't belong there because they're just so highly intelligent that this just drives them insane to see what all's going on.
Well, that's exactly what I was saying. That in fact, if you think you're crazy, if you think you're going crazy, it's probably actually because you're too painfully sane to live in the culture that we've created for ourselves. And like I say, with this bell curve as well, you know what I mean? Have you found yourself coming into your own as you've aged? That you felt a complete alien outsider as a child, but like society has slowly caught up with you as time's gone on.
Yeah.
Your weirdness, your out of the boxness, is less out of the box now than it was when you were a child.
Well, I don't know if it has anything to do with it or not, but you know the astrological sign Libra?
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic that the astrological sign Libra is the scales, and because I always feel like there's a balance between justice, and those scales have to be equal for everybody, And so anytime I see anything that's injustice, I always feel like I got to intervene and balance that back out. Does that sound crazy?
No. I mean, I'm cursed with the equally leonine feature of equality. That I actually find it very hard to see a villain of the piece, because I see both sides so keenly that I find it very hard not to understand the motives of the most kind of what would appear to be, worst of men.
I think in my worst parts of my
I've known too many heroin dealers that take their grannies shopping on a Sunday.
I think in the worst part of my life is whenever I decided to try to save the world. I want to do my part to do the best that I can for everybody, because I love people, as much as possibly humanly possible. But I got to the point where I had to realize that I had to take care of myself first in order to be able to take care of other folks, and that there was the chances of me being able to save the world. I could do my part to make the world a better place, but I was trying to take on that entire burden of saving the entire world, and that was probably one of my worst mistakes that I ever made.
That's probably actually a very sound piece of advice. If you want to save the world, start with one person, and probably the best person to start with is yourself.
So
you're not going to be much.
If you hear me on my shows, I say it all the time. You probably read it in the chat room several times. I'm always saying peace and love to the world, because after losing my family members and like that, you don't never get a second chance to say after what you should have said before. So I want to put a positive out there for everybody that, if anybody had any times that they were feeling down or something like that, heck, I'm always around and I have an open ear and enough love in my heart to go to the entire world. So I'm going to share that, every time I'm with my friends. When I leave, I'm going to tell them I love them, peace and love is basically the best thing that I can say to them. I mean, if I never say that and then I don't have that opportunity, that's a terrible thing for me. And
well, this was certainly, like I say, Vin kind of dropped this change of time slot on me and requested this particular subject matter for this evening, which I was more than happy to oblige. But one of the things that he did ask me to do was actually to put myself out there for the listeners, for anybody to email in. They can get hold of me through info@welfair, that's WELLFAIR, welfare.org.uk, or if you go to welfare.org.uk, you'll find an email page there which has a team email button which will come to me as well. Privately email me at info@welfare.org.uk. And essentially, I will do my best. I mean, this is TNS Seeking Solutions. Well, really, we are only going to find our own solutions from our own stories. And so, even if you don't want your story to be brought to air, if you don't feel comfortable with your story being publicised, please don't keep it private. Let us know. You know what I mean? Send us an email. Get hold of me on Skype, free-manjack on Skype. I'm around most of the time, like Ashers is here. You know what I mean? I'm a mad insomniac. I'm around 24/7, so it doesn't matter what time of the night or day. If you can get hold of me, you're welcome to try. And essentially, even if it's not a subject for broadcast, the simple working with you and getting the feedback that provides. I mean, I've worked with people up and down the country now with varying degrees of mental health problems, and so far have had the most positive of responses from people. I'm not going to name names here, but certainly I won't be blowing my own trumpet to say that I've probably helped at least 2 or 3 people through fairly serious mental health issues in my time since taking up the airwaves on TNS. So even if that's the only 3 people that I ever helped through this, that's 3 people more than I would have helped without this. So I'm more than happy to do that repeatedly. And as our Shaz here is alluding to, I'm sure that you can grab him on Skype or find his email anytime, somewhere. Yeah,
anytime. If you see me on there, I've been down the road, and that's one of the things I wanted to tell you, Jack. I've traveled down that road that you've seen, and I know what it's like, and I know what helped me out. And helping me out was things like friends like me, friends like you on TNS, and all the other friends. And I'm trying to do my part by giving everybody ideas for energy and so on down the line. But when it all comes down to it, we're all humans, and we need to be able to count on each other in the worst times.
Well, this is one of the things that I was broaching upon earlier, is that often we feel bereft of the tools to help people with serious mental health problems. But like I say, we all actually know what's right. We all know, you know what I mean? We don't need other people to tell us what to do. What we need is people to support us in our efforts to do those things that are right.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
And so moral support is often all that somebody is lacking. And that this is one of the key things that the psychiatrist that I ended up with that essentially saved my life, because he didn't medicate me. And he told me that I had quite enough drugs in my system already, thank you very much, and that he wasn't going to add anything more to that load, and that we were going to deal with this by any other method. And one of the key things that he said to me during our sessions was that if you have enough friends, you have no need of a psychiatrist.
That's what I'm saying. Just to know that there's somebody there for you when you need an ear, that's a big deal. It really is.
And a friend doesn't have to be, you know what I mean, your mate that you went to school with. We're in the internet age now. I'm sure that many of the people that I've now met through the TNS chat box would consider me amongst their friends. We've never met, we've never communicated in any other way other than written words on the screen, but I'm sure that we know each other well enough now to count each other amongst our friends. I realise that virtual friends are possibly a subject of a bit of a...
Man, you know, I got friends all over the world. I got friends in Australia and everywhere, and it's to the point that, like, for a while there, I hadn't heard from Ducky, and I started getting concerned about, you know, whether he's all right and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of put the word out through the internet and found out that he was all right. But, you know, we're like family, man. Regardless of where we at all over the planet, we're like family. And, you know, I may not get to ever meet you in person, but you can rest assured that if there's anything I can do to help you out in any way possible, I'm going to be here for you, brother. That's just me.
Yeah. Well, I think, and this is, I think that the certainly the larger part of the Denzians of the TNS chat. Yeah, you lot in typist land, you of the typos. And the smileys, which I hate. What's wrong with the bloody written word? But a lot of us will have experienced such diversity of the knocks and, you know what I mean, the slings and arrows of life, that there will barely be a problem that you won't find a willing ear and possibly a helpful, you know what I mean, a helpful word of advice to get you through a problem. I mean, lean on the people that you see, lean on the people that you interact with, because most people, and you know what I mean, and if you're not banging on their door asking to borrow a tenner every other day, then most people are more than happy to, you know what I mean, to look up from their bloody situation, to stop focusing on what their problems are, and possibly help a fellow person out with their problems. And this is, like I say, that Reichian directional arrow, the all-going energy arrow, is entirely kind of upheld with this. That when we are distracted from our own problems and attend ourselves to somebody else's problems, our sense of our own problems diminishes, and often in that diminished sense of our own problems, suddenly clarity is found where we find the solutions unbidden.
Well, I always believed that we were here on this planet to be caretakers of all the land and all the animals and each other, and basically do whatever it is using our talents and our gifts to help one another out. Vin's always saying some word to me that he says it to everybody, but it rings out to me about words having meanings. And so before a person actually types in something in a chat room, they should really think about the impact that those words can actually have, you know, because it's basically, you know, negativity breeds negativity and positivity breeds positivity. And if we're here to help one another out, I would think that the wisest choice would be to try to spread a positive message if you're going to open your mouth. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have the grave good fortune of being hugely anxiolytic, probably to a degree kind of post-traumatic, to the extent that the merest raising of a voice sends me cowering for a corner, so kind of intellectually at least. And so I literally disengage from any negative discussion, just as a default stance, so I don't really suffer from any of that. Other people do that shit.
Well, I'm kind of like a sponge, man. Whenever I'm around people who's pissed off, I usually get pissed off. When I'm around people who's in a good mood, I'm in a good mood. So I don't know what that says about me, other than I like to be around happy people.
Yeah, well, to a degree, what you're describing there is empathy.
Yeah,
and it's not generally speaking a masculine trait, which is why possibly you find yourself extraordinary with it. But I can assure you, it is an entirely masculine trait, and is part of the kind of whole endeavour to remove the asexual nature of the sexes and replace it with an entirely polarised sexuality, which is just completely false. Real men cry.
Well, yeah, I agree. I've done my share, and I'm not ashamed to say it, because, you know, if a man can cry about something, you know he's got some bit of goodness in him.
And as my good friend Sarah, who I met while travelling the highways and byways of this country, girls can also install and uninstall diesel bus engines on their own in a field on a greasy pallet. 5 times in total she pulled out an 11-litre diesel bus engine and semi-auto gearbox from a rear mount on a coach chassis on an airport coach, and she did it all on her own, and she did it in a field. So there you go.
I got a cousin that tell you what, she can do anything a man can do.
Oh, this girl could do several things more than a bloody man can do. Trust me, this is the girl who taught me about diesel fuel injection, and I thought I was a trained mechanic at the time. I certainly knew very little about the actual nature of the nuances of diesel fuel injection until she rolled her sleeves up and showed me around it.
Well, she's definitely beyond a shadow of a doubt female, but I'm going to tell you what, man, she'll hold her own.
Oh, pretty too. That was the thing. You know what I mean? It wasn't like she was some big scary, you know what I mean, muscular. She was just a regular girly girl, farm worker, admittedly. So you know what I mean. Used to pulling her weight, but it was more the attitude. She just had that can-do attitude.
Well, thanks for having me on your show, man. I appreciate it. When I heard you talking about this particular subject, it kind of hit home because, you know, there's a lot of people out there. We've all lost felt relatives and stuff, but you know, not everybody's lost a relative to suicide. And that's one of the things that the survivors afterwards have to contend with.
Well, this was my point as well with our discussion of the potential, at least, of your cousin, I think it was, having possibly been driven to suicide by the medication. That this is the thing that most people are private about whether or not they're using that sort of medication, and this is something that perhaps we can broach with all of our friends, with all of our family members. If you suspect, you know what I mean, if you see them going off to swallow a tablet, you know what I mean, on a regular basis, just check with them what that tablet is. If it's one of these psychiatric medications, just have a gentle word with them about the potential for unbidden thoughts to create an emotional state that wouldn't normally have pre-existed the use of those kind of medications, and just suggest to them that if they find themselves in that state, A, to pick up the phone, because, like we're saying, friendship is the easiest bloody cure for all of this. B, go out for a walk, like I was saying, with the you know what I mean, the slow walk and looking up. Even, you know what I mean, posture and that is important. But most important, don't allow yourself to take yourself too seriously in that condition, because that really is the issue, is that these thoughts are indistinguishable from your normal thoughts. Okay, so the fact that you're thinking that you are the most useless thing on the planet and that you couldn't possibly have fucked up any bigger and that your life may as well come to an end, those thoughts will appear to you exactly like your ordinary thoughts, but they will have no bearing on reality, on the normal state of your thoughts from the circumstances that you find yourself in. So With
that said, one of the important points that if you're not depressed and you're not in that particular instance, and you actually see somebody who is in that particular instance, if you're going to approach them, you need to approach with understanding, because to them, their medicine is their lifeline, and without that medicine, they're not going to be able to cope, and that's what they believe. So just by being there and keeping your eyes peeled and putting a positive thought to them every so often to let them know that they're never alone, that you're always going to be around, you know, that's going to be really beneficial for anybody to be finding herself in that fortunate circumstance.
Good morning and good afternoon. Everybody I pass on the street that I have seen before, I make a point of saying good morning or good afternoon or good evening to them. And you'll be amazed. And you'll be amazed to see the difference on your street. If you live in a residential street in an inner city area, see the difference that it makes in your neighbourhood within a matter of a couple of months. Start practicing the politeness ritual. It costs absolutely nothing and it can work miracles. Befriend your neighbours. That's a good place to start.
That's a really good place to start because society is kind of messed up and everybody's kind of become reclusive, you know.
Ah, well, my neighbours are bloody armed to the teeth. One of my befriended neighbours is currently just about to finish a 9 stretch for shooting a copper.
Yeah.
You think I'm frightened of him, or do you think I'm frightened of the coppers that were chasing him?
They want to basically put themselves into a bubble that they feel protected in that bubble, and anytime anything from outside that bubble comes in, you know. But shoot, man, you'd be surprised how much a good word to somebody will go, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, Shaz, I'm going to let you go because I'm already hack-throated from having been on air for too long today. I'm actually going to revert to a pod. I did a show not last Saturday, but the Saturday before, and this is just going to fit, I think, so perfectly with the solutions basis of this. There's have you heard of Tom Campbell, the American physicist?
No, I don't think
My Big Toe and digital virtual reality. Well, his kind of take on the plastic nature of reality, working through statistics.
I'll listen into the podcast.
Okay, well, he's essentially described observed reality as being 80% of your own creation, of your own perception. Yeah. And if that is the case, if we apply that as a default measure, that 80% of everything that we experience is of and from ourselves and not imposed upon us from without, yeah, then straight away we can see that 80% of our depression is because we feel like we should be depressed at the moment, yeah, or have some other driving need to be in that emotional state, and that the abstraction from the current sort of ego-centred focus on one's state and the understanding of this kind of 80%, 20% mix, it allows you to completely change your perception of reality. And with that tool to change your perception of reality, depression becomes a myth long forgotten, in my mind.
Well, my perception of reality is the world's kind of jacked up, but it's not to the point where we're beyond hope as long as we have each other and TNS Radio and all of us together trying to seek solutions for one another. And so with that said, you know, all I can say is thanks for having me on your show, and peace and love to you, brother, and everybody else on this planet.
No, thank you, Shaz. It's been really good talking to you. It's a shame we haven't bumped heads before. Anyway.
Well, anytime you need somebody to talk to, you just give me a holler. I'm
going to go to a classic from the Capitol, and then I'm going to play out with a pod for the last hour till midnight. Dubs is up in what's the number? Fulvic, the Fulvic Free State up there in the Scottish Islands. Currently is erecting a large piece of bluestone, Welsh bluestone, the stuff that that Stonehenge is built out of. They're erecting a large blue stone to our fallen hero, Loki, the chap who sat in the judge's seat and assumed the role of judge in our event at Birkenhead last year when we took over a courthouse. He died recently of a heart attack, so they're raising a memorial blue stone to him up in Fulvic at the moment. So, no me and Super Dubs for music after midnight, but I'll probably put on some music for you lot anyway. But anyway, here's some Clash and London Calling. Shazzies, you've been fabulous, and I hope you enjoy this pod as well. This is, to my mind, the reason why I'm playing the arse off of this and spamming it all over the place, and in case anyone's bored of hearing it, I think this really nails the subject, and I don't do that very often. I'm really hard to be concise. I find it hard to be concise, but this is concise and worth listening to in my book. Anyway, here's a tune. See you later, Shazzies.
Take care.
Yeah. You too.